She had spent 32 years being invisible. That was about to change in a way no one expected, least of all herself. The mud was thick and black, the kind that clung to boots and hems and refused to let go. It had rained for 3 days, straight across the Derbyshire countryside, turning the roads into rivers and the lanes into swamps. And yet, on this fourth morning, as the grey dawn broke over the village of Thornwick, a lone figure trudged up the main street, his boots caked with filth, his greatcoat sodden and torn, his hat missing entirely. He looked like a man who had walked through the very earth itself. The villagers barely glanced at him. A traveller, they assumed, perhaps a soldier returning from some forgotten war, or a tradesman whose cart had broken down in the mire. No one looked twice. No one saw the fine stitching beneath the mud on his coat. No one noticed the way he held himself, even exhausted, even broken, straight-backed, chin lifted, as though invisible hands held his spine in place. No one, that is, except the woman standing in the doorway of the old stone cottage at the end of the lane. Her name was Clara Holloway, and she had long since stopped expecting anyone to see her. She was the spinster niece of the village doctor, taken in out of charity when her parents had died, some 20 years past. She cooked, she cleaned, she dressed her uncle's wound dressings, she read aloud to him in the evenings. She was useful, she was quiet. She was, in every sense that mattered to the world, invisible, but she saw things that others missed, and what she saw, as the mud-caked stranger limped past her gate, made her heart stop. It was not his face, which was obscured by grime and exhaustion. It was not his voice, for he had not spoken. It was something else, something in the way the stray dog that had been following him suddenly pressed against his leg, as though seeking protection. Something in the way he paused before her gate, not because he had seen her, but because his body had given out. He collapsed. Clara did not think. She moved. She was at his side before the door had finished swinging shut behind her. She knelt in the mud, heedless of her skirts, and turned his head gently to one side so he would not choke. His skin was cold, too cold. His breathing was shallow, ragged. The stray dog sat a few feet away, watching her with eyes that seemed to say, "He is yours now. Take care of him." And she did. With strength she did not know she possessed, she half carried, half dragged him to the cottage. Her uncle was away, visiting a patient in a nearby village. She was alone. She should have thought of propriety. She should have waited for help. But there was no time for should-haves. She laid him on the floor before the hearth, built up the fire, and began the slow work of saving a man she had never met. Hours passed. She removed his coat, his boots. She found no identifying papers, no money, nothing but a small signet ring on his little finger, so crusted with mud that the crest was impossible to read. She wrapped him in blankets, fed the fire, and sat beside him through the long grey afternoon, watching his chest rise and fall. You know what it feels like to be alone with a stranger's life in your hands. That strange intimacy, that weight. Clara felt it keenly. She had spent her life caring for others, her uncle's patients, the village children, the old widow next door. But this was different. This man was not her patient. He was not her neighbour. He was a mystery, delivered to her doorstep by the storm, and she could not shake the feeling that something about him was not what it seemed. When he finally stirred, hours later, the fire had burned low and the room was steeped in shadow. Clara had dozed in the chair beside him. She woke to the sound of his voice, rough, raw, barely a whisper. "Where am I?" She leaned forward. "You are safe. You are in Thornwick, in Derbyshire. You collapsed on the road." He tried to sit up. His arms shook with the effort. She pressed a hand gently to his shoulder. "Please rest, you are not well." He looked at her then, properly looked at her. His eyes were grey, the colour of the Channel in winter, piercing. They seemed to see past her face, past her worn dress, past the years of invisibility, to something she had almost forgotten existed. "You helped me," he said. Not a question, a statement of wonder. "I did what anyone would do." "No," he said, and his voice had a gravity that made her breath catch. "They would not have." He did not explain. He did not need to. Clara understood. She knew this village. She knew how quickly people looked away from a stranger in distress. She knew what it meant to be passed over, but she had not looked away. Over the next few days, as he recovered strength, the mystery of him only deepened. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were measured, deliberate. He asked her questions about the village, about her life, about the surrounding countryside. He listened with an intensity that made her feel, for the first time in years, that someone was truly attending to her. He never told her his name. She did not ask. She had learned long ago that some people carry secrets like wounds, press too hard, and they only bleed more. On the third day, her uncle returned. He was a sharp, impatient man who had long since stopped seeing his niece as anything more than a useful piece of furniture. When he found the stranger in his home, he was furious. "You took in a vagrant, Clara, without consulting me, without knowing who he is." "He was dying," she said quietly. "Would you have had me leave him in the road?" Her uncle's face reddened. Before he could speak, the stranger rose from his chair by the fire. He was still weak, but something in his posture had changed. The exhaustion was gone. In its place was a command that seemed to fill the room. "Your niece saved my life," he said, his voice low and even. "I will not forget it, and I will not have her berated for it." Her uncle opened his mouth, then closed it. There was something in the stranger's tone that brooked no argument, something that spoke of authority, of power. "Who are you?" Clara thought, but she did not say it aloud. The stranger looked at her then, and something passed between them, a recognition, a promise. "I will not forget," he repeated, and she knew he was speaking to her alone. The next morning, he was gone. He left no note, no trace. The bed in the spare room was made, the fire was banked. The only sign he had been there at all was the small signet ring, which Clara found on the kitchen table, wrapped in a piece of cloth. Inside the cloth, in handwriting that was elegant, precise, were 3 words: "For when you know." She did not know what they meant, but she kept the ring anyway, hidden in a small wooden box beneath her bed. She did not tell her uncle, she did not tell anyone. But she thought about him. Every day. The way he had looked at her. The way he had spoken. The way he had made her feel for the first time in 32 years, as though she mattered. And here is the beautiful part, the part that changes everything. The man she had saved was no vagrant. He was no soldier, no tradesman, no ordinary traveller. He was the Duke of Ashworth, and the reason he had been wandering the Derbyshire roads, alone in disguise, was not a matter of circumstance. It was a matter of survival. You see, the Duke of Ashworth had enemies, powerful ones, his own family, in fact. His younger brother, Lord Philip Morland, had spent the past 3 years trying to have him declared unfit to seize the title and the lands. There had been accusations, investigations, whispers of madness and mismanagement. The Duke had been forced to flee his own estate in the dead of night, with only the clothes on his back and the ring on his finger. He had been travelling in disguise, hoping to reach a trusted ally in the north. But the storm had stopped him. And a woman in a grey stone cottage had saved his life. Clara did not know any of this. Not yet. But the Duke had not forgotten her. He had not forgotten the way she had knelt in the mud without hesitation, the way she had cared for him without asking who he was, the way she had looked at him, not at his mud-caked clothes, but at him, the man beneath. He had spent his entire life surrounded by people who saw only his title, his wealth, his power. And here, in a forgotten village, a woman had seen him, truly seen him. He would not forget, he would return. But the path back to her would be long and dangerous and filled with betrayal, and before he could claim her, he would have to face the brother who wanted him dead. Stay with me here, because this is the moment everything shifts. The Duke arrived at his ally's estate, a sprawling manor in the Yorkshire moors, 3 days after leaving Thornwick. Lord Whitmore, a grey-haired baron who had served the Duke's father, received him with shock and relief. "Your Grace," Whitmore said, his voice shaking, "we thought you dead. Your brother has been in control of Ashworth Hall for 2 weeks. He has declared you missing, presumed deceased. The courts are preparing to transfer the title." The Duke's jaw tightened. "Then we must move quickly." But even as he planned his return, even as he gathered evidence of his brother's treachery, even as he prepared to reclaim his life, one thought remained constant. One face, one pair of eyes that had looked at him without greed, without calculation, without fear. Clara. He had left her the ring on purpose. It was the only thing of value he possessed at that moment, and he had given it to her. Not as payment, as a promise that he would come back. But the months passed, winter turned to spring. The Duke reclaimed his estate, exposed his brother's treachery, and emerged victorious, but changed. The fight had left its marks. He was harder now, more guarded. The only softness that remained was the memory of the woman in the grey cottage. He sent men to investigate. Quietly, discreetly. He learned her name, Clara Holloway. He learned her circumstances, orphaned, dependent on an uncle who did not value her. invisible to the world. He learned that she still had the ring, and he learned that she had not stopped thinking about him either. But the Duke could not simply ride into Thornwick and declare himself. The scandal would destroy her. A spinster of 32, receiving the attention of a duke. The village would talk. Her reputation would be ruined. He had to be careful. He had to be patient. So he did something unexpected. He came back in disguise, not as a mud-caked traveller this time. No, this time he came as a gentleman of modest means, a scholar investigating the local history of Derbyshire. He took a room at the inn. He visited the village church, the old abbey ruins. He made himself known, slowly, carefully. But you, too, must feel the weight of that moment. The Duke, a man of power, choosing to step back into the shadows, not for himself, but for her. That single act of humility, of patience, is the very heart of this story. If you want to see how a love built on such careful foundations unfolds, subscribe now, so you do not miss the moment these two hearts finally speak the truth. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were Clara? Would you have trusted a man who left you a ring and vanished for months? And one afternoon, he found himself standing outside the doctor's cottage, his heart pounding like a boy's. Clara was in the garden, hanging laundry. She did not see him at first. The wind lifted her hair, and she tucked it behind her ear with a gesture that struck him as unbearably tender. He stepped forward. "Good afternoon." She turned, and the moment she saw him, even in his new guise, even without the mud and the exhaustion, she knew. The clothespin slipped from her fingers. "You," she breathed. He smiled. It was the first genuine smile he had worn in months. "I told you I would not forget." And this is the moment most people miss. The moment that changes everything is not always grand. It is not always a ballroom or a public declaration. Sometimes it is a garden on a spring afternoon, a woman in a simple dress, a man who has crossed half of England to find her. Clara did not ask why he had come back. She did not ask who he really was, though she suspected far more than she let on. She simply looked at him, and he looked at her, and something settled into place between them, something that had been waiting for this moment since the day he collapsed at her gate. "Would you like to come inside?" she said, and he said yes. But the path ahead was not smooth. Her uncle, of course, was suspicious. A stranger appearing twice, showing interest in his niece. He could not comprehend it. No one had ever shown interest in Clara before. Why would they start now? "What does he want with you?" her uncle demanded one evening. "A man like that, well-spoken, well-dressed, why would he waste his time on a woman of your age and station?" The words cut. They were meant to, but Clara had changed. The Duke's attention had done something to her, or rather it had undone something. The armor of invisibility she had worn for so long had cracked, and through those cracks something new was growing. "Perhaps," she said, surprising herself with her own steadiness, "he sees something you do not." Her uncle stared at her as though she had grown a second head. But Clara did not care. She had begun to realize something that had been waiting for her all along, that the people who dismissed her were not judges of her worth. They were simply people who had never bothered to look, and the Duke did not just look. He saw. They met in secret at first, walks in the woods, conversations by the old oak tree. He told her fragments of his story, enough to make her understand, enough to make her trust him. He did not tell her his title, not yet. He wanted her to see him without it. He wanted to be sure, and she did see him. She saw the exhaustion behind his eyes, the weight he carried, the wound that had not yet healed. She saw the man he was, stripped of rank and fortune. She also saw the ring on her own finger. She had worn it on a chain around her neck, hidden beneath her dress, every day since he left. One evening, as the sun set over the Derbyshire hills, he finally told her the truth. "I am not a scholar," he said. "I am not a traveller. I am—" He paused, searching for words that would not sound like a barrier. "My name is William Morland. I am the Duke of Ashworth." He watched her face, waiting for the change. The awe, the fear, the calculation. It did not come. She was silent for a long moment. Then she said softly, "I know." He stared at her. "You know?" She touched the ring at her throat. "I cleaned this, the day you left. I found the crest beneath the mud. A lion, rampant, holding a sword. I asked my uncle what it meant. He told me it was the crest of the Morlands, that they had been dukes for generations. And you did not tell anyone?" "Who would I tell?" she said, and there was no bitterness in her voice, only a quiet truth. "And besides, I did not want to share you." He reached for her hand. His own was trembling. "Clara, I have fought for my title, I have fought for my name, but I have never wanted anything the way I want you." She looked at him, and there was something new in her eyes. Not the fear he had expected, not the awe. Something deeper, something that had been growing since the day she found him in the mud. "Then do not fight for me," she said. "Just stay. If this moment makes your heart tighten, stay, because we are only halfway through, and the hardest choice is still ahead." The Duke's return to Ashworth Hall did not go unnoticed. His brother, Lord Philip, had been exiled but not destroyed. He had allies still, men who whispered in dark corners, who dreamed of seeing the Duke fall. And when Philip learned that his brother had been visiting a spinster in a Derbyshire village, he saw an opportunity. He began to spread rumours that the Duke had lost his mind, that he had taken a mistress of low birth, that the Ashworth name was being dragged through the mud. The Ton was fascinated. Scandal was, after all, their favourite entertainment. The Duke received letters, threats, warnings. His steward begged him to be cautious, to end the relationship before it destroyed everything he had rebuilt. But the Duke had been cautious his entire life. He had played the game, kept the mask, upheld the name. And what had it brought him? An empty hall, a cold bed, a life constructed of obligations and silences. He had found something real for the first time. He was not about to let it go. Clara, meanwhile, was living through a transformation she had not anticipated. The village had learned of the Duke's visits. Eyes followed her in the street. Whispers followed her to the market. Some called her a fortune hunter. Others, more cruel, called her a fool. "He will leave you," they said. Men like him always do. But Clara had been invisible for 32 years. She had learned to live without the approval of others, and now that she had found someone who saw her, who valued her, she was not going to hide. She walked through the village with her head high. She attended church, visited the sick, tended her garden. She did not apologize for existing. And the Duke, watching from a distance, fell deeper in love with every passing day. One evening, he arrived at her cottage with a carriage. He was not in disguise. He wore his finest coat, his family crest gleaming on his lapel. The entire village turned to watch. He walked to her door, and when she opened it, he knelt, not as a duke before a commoner, as a man before the woman who had saved him. "Clara Holloway," he said loud enough for the gathered crowd to hear, "I have spent my life surrounded by people who wanted something from me. You are the only person who has ever wanted nothing but me. I have no words to tell you what that means." She stared at him, her hand pressed to her mouth. "I am asking you to marry me," he said. "Not because it is proper, not because it is expected, because I cannot imagine a single day of the rest of my life without you in it." The crowd was silent. The wind carried the scent of rain. Clara looked at him. This man who had come to her covered in mud and dust, this man who had seen her when no one else did, this man who had crossed half of England to keep a promise. She knelt with him, taking his face in her hands. "I have waited my whole life to be seen," she whispered, "and you saw me." She did not say yes. She did not need to. He stood, pulled her gently to her feet, and kissed her there before everyone, in a declaration that would echo through the village for generations. But even as they celebrated, the darkness that had followed the Duke was closing in. His brother, defeated but not destroyed, had one last move to make, and it would strike at the heart of everything they had built. The engagement was announced in the London papers. The Ton erupted. The Duke of Ashworth marrying a spinster from a village, a woman without fortune, without family, without name. It was scandalous. It was delicious. It was exactly what Philip needed. He approached Clara at the village market, disguised as a merchant. He spoke softly, carefully, planting seeds of doubt. "Do you truly believe he will go through with it?" he asked. "A man like that. He will tire of you. They always do. And when he does, you will be left with nothing, not even your reputation." But Clara had been invisible too long to be shaken by shadows. She looked at the stranger with calm eyes. "You do not know him," she said, "and you do not know me." Philip smiled, but his eyes were cold. "We shall see." That night, a fire broke out at the Duke's stables. Rare horses perished. The Duke's favourite stallion barely escaped. Evidence was planted, a handkerchief embroidered with Clara's initials. The accusation was swift. Clara had set the fire in a fit of jealousy, enraged by rumours that the Duke was keeping company with a lady of the Ton. It was a lie, a carefully constructed, vicious lie. But in a world where truth was fragile and reputation was everything, it was enough. The Duke was summoned before the magistrates. Clara was questioned. The village turned against her. Even her uncle, for all his disdain, could not protect her. But the Duke did something that no one expected. He stood before the magistrates, his voice steady as stone, and said, "I know who set the fire. It was not Clara Holloway. It was my brother, Lord Philip Morland, and I have proof." The room went silent. He produced letters, witnesses, a trail of evidence that Philip had left, arrogant in his belief that he would never be caught. The magistrates believed him. Philip was arrested, tried, and sentenced to transportation. The Ashworth name was restored, but the damage had been done. Clara had been publicly accused. Even after the truth came out, the whispers did not stop. Some would always believe the worst of a woman who rose above her station. She went to the Duke and told him, her voice barely a whisper, "Perhaps it would be better if you let me go." He took her face in his hands. "Better for whom? For the people who will never understand? Or for us?" "For you," she said. "Your name, your title, your future." He shook his head. "My future is you. It has been you since the moment I opened my eyes in your cottage and saw your face." She cried then. Not from grief. From the overwhelming relief of being chosen, not despite everything, but because of everything. But the hardest choice was still ahead. The Duke's allies, his stewards, even the family solicitor, begged him to reconsider. The marriage would cost him. Political allies would withdraw. Doors would close. He listened, he considered. And then he did exactly what he had promised. He married her. The wedding was small, no grand cathedral, no ton. Just a quiet ceremony in the village church where they had first met, with wildflowers on the altar and the windows open to the spring air. Clara wore a simple white dress, her mother's. The Duke wore his finest coat, and the ring she had kept, now cleaned and polished, gleamed on her finger. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, the Duke turned to her with a look so tender it made the few guests catch their breath. "You saved me," he said, so softly that only she could hear. "Now let me spend my life showing you what that means." The carriage that carried them to Ashworth Hall was a gilded cage of velvet and expectation. Clara pressed her face to the glass, watching the Derbyshire hills shrink behind her, the familiar grey sky giving way to a broader, brighter horizon. She had never travelled more than 10 miles from Thornwick in her entire life. Now she was crossing half of England to become a duchess. The Duke sat beside her, his hand covering hers. He did not speak much during the journey, but his presence was a constant, steady warmth. Every now and then he would glance at her, and she would see the same wonder in his eyes that she felt in her own chest, the quiet disbelief that this was real, that they had found each other. When the gates of Ashworth Hall finally came into view, Clara's breath caught. It was not a house, it was a kingdom. Stone walls that stretched for miles, towers that pierced the clouds, gardens that rolled across the landscape like green oceans. She had seen engravings of great estates in books, but they had been flat, lifeless things. This was alive. This was overwhelming. "It is too much," she whispered, not meaning to speak aloud. The Duke's hand tightened on hers. "It is only stone and earth. The life of this place comes from the people within it, and now you are one of them." The carriage stopped before the grand entrance. Footmen in livery rushed forward, the doors swung open, and Clara stepped out into a world that had been built for someone else, someone with a name, a lineage, a purpose she did not yet feel she possessed. The servants were lined up in a long row, their faces a mixture of curiosity and careful deference. The butler, a tall man with silver hair and an expression that betrayed nothing, stepped forward. "Welcome to Ashworth Hall, Your Grace," he said, and it took Clara a moment to realize he was speaking to her. She was the Duchess now. The first weeks were a study in adjustment. Clara had spent her entire life being useful in ways that were small, tangible, overlooked. She knew how to tend a fire, how to stretch a meal, how to mend a torn sleeve. But running a household of this magnitude was an entirely different language. There were accounts to review, menus to approve, staff to manage, social obligations that poured in like a tide she could not hold back. The Duke gave her space to learn. He did not hover, did not correct, did not treat her as a child playing at adulthood. When she made mistakes, and she made many, he simply waited for her to find her own solutions. But not everyone in the household was patient. Learning to be a duchess is not unlike learning to be anyone. It is measured in missteps before grace finds its footing. If you want to see Clara carve her place in this vast house, subscribe so you do not miss a single moment of her transformation. And tell me in the comments, have you ever felt the weight of a role you were not yet sure you could fill? The housekeeper, Mrs. Aldridge, had served the Ashworth family for 40 years. She had seen 3 duchesses come and go, and she had her own ideas about how things should be done. She did not say anything directly, but her silence was louder than words. She watched Clara with eyes that seemed to say, "You are not one of us. You will never be one of us." Clara felt the weight of that gaze every morning when she reviewed the household accounts, every evening when she sat alone in the vast dining room, every night when she lay in a bed so large it made her feel like a child. But she did not complain. She had not survived 32 years of invisibility by being fragile. She observed. She learned. She waited. And then one afternoon she found her moment. The Duke had mentioned in passing that his mother's rose garden had fallen into neglect after her death. There had been a gardener once, an old man who had tended the roses for 50 years, but he had passed on and no one had taken his place. The garden was now a tangle of thorns and weeds, a quiet monument to grief. Clara did not announce her plan. She simply walked out into the garden the next morning, before the servants were awake, and began to work. She did not know much about roses, but she knew about dirt. She knew about patience. She knew that things grew when you gave them time and care. For 3 weeks, she rose before dawn and spent 2 hours in the garden. She pruned what could be pruned, cleared what could be cleared, watered what could be saved. Her hands blistered, then calloused. Her knees ached. Her dress became a ruin of grass stains and mud. But slowly, painfully, the garden began to remember itself. One morning the Duke found her there. He stood at the edge of the garden, watching her as she coaxed a wild rose shoot back onto its trellis. She did not see him at first. When she finally looked up, his expression was not one of gratitude. It was one of seeing her truly, in a way that went deeper than words. He stepped forward and knelt beside her in the dirt, heedless of his fine trousers. He took her hands, her raw, blistered, beautiful hands, and pressed them to his lips. "You are giving life back to my mother's garden," he said, his voice rough. "I am giving it back to all of us," she replied. That evening, the first bloom opened, fell deep crimson rose, the color of a heart. Mrs. Aldridge saw the garden the following morning. She said nothing, but something in her face shifted. The wall of silence cracked, just slightly. And Clara knew that she had won her first battle, not with force, not with authority, but with the quiet, stubborn persistence of love. But a duchess's life is not only lived within her own walls. The world demands to see her. And the world of the Tun was not kind to newcomers. The first social event was a dinner hosted by Lady Weatherby, a formidable woman whose opinion could make or break a reputation within a 50-mile radius. Clara dressed carefully, chose her words carefully, carried herself with the composure she had learned in a lifetime of being overlooked. It was not enough. The guests arrived with smiles that did not reach their eyes. They asked polite questions that were traps. Where had she grown up? Thornwick, charming. And her family. Her father had been a physician. How admirable. And her education. She had been taught at home. How quaint. Every word was a tiny wound, delivered with surgical precision. Clara smiled. She answered. She did not flinch. But when she found a quiet corner during the evening, away from the glittering crowd, she allowed herself one moment of weakness. She pressed her hand to her chest, where the ring still hung on its chain beneath her gown, and she thought, "I do not belong here. I will never belong here." And then she heard a voice behind her, soft and unexpected. "I was the daughter of a merchant." Clara turned. A woman was standing there, older than her by perhaps a decade, with silver-threaded hair and warm brown eyes. She wore a gown of deep blue velvet, and there was an intelligence in her face that was not born of breeding. "I married a baron," the woman continued, stepping closer, "and I have survived 30 years of this world by remembering that their disdain is a reflection of their own limitations, not mine. You have something they will never understand. You have a duke who loves you. That is armor they cannot pierce." She extended her hand. "I am Lady Whitmore. My husband has spoken of you. He says you are the bravest woman he has ever met." Clara took her hand and felt, for the first time since entering this glittering prison, a thread of connection. "Thank you," she said. And she meant it. The rest of the evening was bearable. Not kind, but bearable. Clara held herself differently now, with a quiet defiance that made the sharp-tongued ladies step back just slightly. She was no longer a target. She was a fortress. And when the Duke found her at the end of the night, his eyes searched hers with concern. "Are you all right?" She smiled, and it was not a mask. "I am learning." He took her hand and led her to the carriage. As they drove home through the dark, he told her stories of his own first years in society, the mistakes, the humiliations, the slow, painful earning of respect. "You will win them," he said, "not by becoming like them. By being exactly who you are." "And who am I?" she asked, half joking. He turned to her, his face illuminated by the passing lanterns. "You are the woman who saved a man in the mud. You are the woman who resurrected a dead garden. You are my wife. That is enough." But the hardest test was yet to come. A letter arrived from London, bearing the seal of the Queen herself, an invitation to a royal ball, the most significant social event of the season. The Duke was expected to attend, and now so was his new Duchess. Clara looked at the invitation, at the elegant script, and felt the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes. "I cannot," she whispered. The Duke took the letter from her hands. "You can, and you will. And I will be beside you every moment." She looked at him, at the certainty in his eyes, and she made a choice. She would go. The night of the ball arrived with the kind of cold that settles into the bones. Clara stood before the mirror in her bedchamber, wearing a gown of deep emerald silk that her husband had commissioned for her. It was simple by the standards of the ton, but it was beautiful. And for the first time in her life, Clara looked at her reflection and did not see an invisible woman. She saw someone worthy of being seen. The Duke appeared in the doorway. He did not speak. He simply looked at her, and the way his eyes softened told her everything she needed to know. "You are the most beautiful woman in England tonight," he said. She did not believe him, but she believed that he believed it, and that was enough. The ballroom of St. James's Palace was a sea of light and silk and whispered judgments. Clara entered on the Duke's arm, and she felt the weight of every gaze turned toward her, assess her, dismiss her. But she did not shrink. She walked as though she had been born to this. She smiled as though she had never known fear. She danced with her husband as though the entire room did not exist. And something began to shift. Lady Whitmore caught her eye across the room and nodded, a subtle gesture of solidarity. The Baron's wife had done her work. She had whispered to the right people, planted the right seeds. Slowly the wall of coldness began to thaw. One dance became two, two became three. By midnight, Clara had spoken with a dozen ladies, laughed at a countess's joke, and received a compliment from the Earl of something or other that she could not remember 5 minutes later. But the true test came when the Queen herself approached. The room fell silent. Clara curtsied, her heart hammering against her ribs. The Queen looked at her for a long moment. Then she said in a voice that carried through the entire room, "I have heard much about you, Your Grace. They say you saved the Duke's life. They say you restored his mother's garden. They say you have a quiet strength that does not yield to opinion." Clara did not know what to say. She simply held the Queen's gaze. The Queen smiled, a small private thing. "Good. We have too many loud people in this world. It is refreshing to meet one who has learned the power of silence." And then she moved on, leaving Clara standing in a pool of stunned silence. The whispers that followed were different now. Not skepticism, curiosity. The Duke appeared at her side, his hand finding hers. "You did it," he murmured. "We did it," she corrected. They left the ball at 2 in the morning, exhausted and exhilarated. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder in the carriage, watching the London streets blur past. "I think," she said slowly, "I am beginning to understand who I am." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You always knew, Clara. You only needed someone to remind you." But as they returned to Ashworth Hall, a letter was waiting for them. It was from Lord Whitmore, and it contained news that would shake the foundations of everything they had built. The Duke's brother, Philip, had escaped transportation. He was somewhere in England, and he had vowed to destroy them both. The Duke held the letter in his trembling hands. Clara watched the colour drain from his face. She did not need to ask what it said. She could see the truth in his eyes. "He will not stop," the Duke said, his voice barely a whisper. "Not until he has taken everything from me." Clara reached out and took his hand. She had faced down a village of whispers. She had faced down the ton. She had faced down a housekeeper who did not want her. She would face this too. "Then we will face him together," she said, "and we will win." But even as she said it, she felt a cold dread settle in her stomach, because Philip knew them now. He knew their weaknesses. He knew their love for each other, and he would use it against them. The weeks that followed were a shadow war. Philip did not strike directly. He was too clever for that. He sent letters to the Duke's creditors claiming that the Ashworth fortune had been mismanaged. He spread rumours in London that the Duchess had been seen in the company of another man. He hired a man to follow Clara, to watch her, to find any crack in her armour. Clara felt the presence of his agent like a weight on her shoulders. Every time she walked into the garden, every time she visited the village, she felt eyes upon her. She could not prove it, but she knew it. The Duke doubled the guards. He wrote to every ally he could trust. He prepared for war, but the war came from a direction neither of them expected. One afternoon, Clara received a letter. It was folded simply, without seal, without signature. The handwriting was elegant, too elegant for a common criminal. It said, "I have something you want. Meet me at the old abbey ruins at dusk. Come alone, or your sister will suffer." Clara felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. She had a sister, a younger sister, Margaret, who had been sent to live with an aunt in Scotland after their parents died. Clara had not seen her in 15 years. She had written, of course, but the letters had grown sparse, then stopped. She had assumed Margaret had built her own life, found her own path, but Philip had found her. Clara did not tell the Duke, not because she did not trust him, because she knew what he would do. He would bar her from going. He would send men, make a grand show of force, and Margaret would pay the price. So she did what she had always done. She faced the danger alone. As dusk fell, she slipped out of Ashworth Hall through a servant's entrance, her cloak pulled tight, her heart pounding. She walked the 2 miles to the old abbey ruins, through fields and woods she had never travelled before. The ruins stood against the fading sky like the skeleton of a forgotten dream. The walls were broken, the roof long gone. In the centre, where the altar had once stood, a figure waited. Philip. He was older than she remembered from the brief glimpse she had caught at the market. Thinner, harder. His eyes held nothing but cold purpose. "Where is my sister?" Clara demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. Philip smiled. "Safe, for now. She is in a cottage not far from here, unharmed, but that can change very quickly." "What do you want?" He stepped closer. "I want my brother to suffer. I want him to know what it feels like to lose everything. And you, dear sister-in-law, are the one thing he cannot bear to lose." Clara's blood ran cold. "You are going to write a letter," Philip said. "You are going to tell him that you have left him, that you never loved him, that you were using him for his money and his title, and then you are going to disappear." "I will not." Philip's smile did not waver. "Then I will send him your sister's ring, and a lock of her hair, and he will know that her blood is on your hands." Clara felt the world close in around her. She thought of the Duke's face. She thought of his mother's garden. She thought of everything they had built, every quiet triumph, every hard-won hour of peace. And she thought of Margaret, alone, terrified, waiting for a rescue that might never come. She looked at Philip, and she made a choice. "I will write your letter," she said, "but on one condition. You let Margaret go. You send her to London to Lady Whitmore's care. I will see proof before I write a single word." Philip considered. Then he nodded. "Clever. I underestimated you." "Everyone does," she said. 3 days later, a letter arrived from Lady Whitmore. "Your sister is safe, and she is with me. She sends her love and her promise to stay hidden until you call for her." Only then did Clara write the letter that Philip demanded. She wrote it in the garden, at dawn, surrounded by the roses she had brought back to life. The words felt like poison in her mouth. "I never loved you. I was using you. Forgive me, but I cannot stay." She sealed it without reading it again. She could not bear to. Then she left Ashworth Hall with nothing but the clothes on her back and the ring on its chain around her neck. She did not go far. Philip had arranged a room at a coaching inn, a cramped, miserable place where she was to wait until he could arrange her disappearance. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, and wondered if she would ever see the Duke again. But she had not survived 32 years of invisibility by being passive. She had learned to wait, to watch, to find the cracks in the walls, and on the second night she found one. The window at the back of the inn was loose, the drop was not far, and the moon was hidden behind clouds. She slipped out into the darkness, and she ran. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she had to get back to Ashworth Hall. She had to warn the Duke. She had to undo the damage she had done. She ran for hours through fields and woods, her lungs burning, her legs screaming. She did not stop. She did not look back. And when she finally reached the gates of Ashworth Hall, just as the first light of dawn began to crest the hills, she saw that she was too late. The gates were open. The courtyard was filled with carriages. And standing in the doorway, looking at her with eyes that held nothing but devastation, was the Duke. He was holding her letter. Clara stumbled forward, her voice breaking. "William, please, I can explain." He did not move. He did not speak. And Clara realized, in that terrible moment, that she might have lost him forever. But here is what she did not know. The Duke had already read the letter 3 times. He had felt the words cut through him like a blade. He had wanted to tear it apart, to burn it, to pretend it had never existed. But then a thought had come to him unbidden. A memory. The ring. She was not wearing the ring. She had never taken it off, not once, in all the months he had known her. And yet, when he looked at the letter, he realized something. The ring was not mentioned. She did not return it. She did not even reference it. And he knew with a certainty that went deeper than logic that something was wrong. He had been preparing to ride out and search for her when she appeared at the gate, covered in mud, her face streaked with tears, her eyes wild with desperation. And he saw with a clarity that cut through all the darkness that she had not left him. She had been taken. He stepped forward, and the coldness in his face shattered. "Clara." She collapsed into his arms, sobbing, the words spilling out in a torrent. Philip, Margaret, the letter, the escape. He held her until she was silent, until her trembling subsided. Then he looked at her, and there was fire in his eyes. "He will never touch you again," he said. "I swear it." Philip was found within a week. He had been planning to flee to the continent, but the Duke's men were faster. He was captured at a port town disguised as a merchant. The Duke did not have him killed. That would have been too easy. Instead, he had him brought before the magistrates, with evidence of every crime he had committed. Kidnapping, arson, conspiracy to commit murder. This time there was no escape. Philip was sentenced to life in prison. He would never see the light of freedom again. The Duke returned to Ashworth Hall and found Clara in the garden, kneeling among the roses. She looked up as he approached, and he saw that she was crying, but there was something new in her tears. Relief. Release. "It is over," he said, lowering himself beside her. "Is it?" she asked. He took her face in his hands. "It is. He will never hurt you again. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure that no one ever does." She looked at him, at the man who had seen her when she was nothing, who had loved her when she had no name, who had crossed half of England to find her and then crossed it again to save her. "I love you," she said. "I have loved you since the moment you opened your eyes in my cottage." "I just did not know it then." He smiled, the smile that had first made her heart beat faster, the smile that had carried her through every trial. "I know," he said, "and I have loved you since the moment you knelt in the mud without a second thought. You saved me, Clara, and you will save me every day for the rest of my life." He kissed her there, in the garden that she had resurrected, surrounded by the roses that had bloomed from her love. They rebuilt their life together, slowly, carefully, with the patience that had carried them through the storm. The Tan eventually accepted Clara, not because she had changed, but because she had refused to change. Her quiet strength, her steady kindness, her unbreakable loyalty, in the end, even the coldest hearts could not resist. Margaret came to live at Ashworth Hall. The two sisters, reunited after so many years, spent long hours walking in the garden, catching up on a lifetime of lost moments. Clara watched her sister grow from a frightened girl into a confident young woman, and she felt a peace she had never known. And as Clara and the Duke found their way to each other, as the garden bloomed and Margaret found her home, I am reminded that the most beautiful love stories are not the ones where everything comes easily. They are the ones where two people choose each other again and again, even when the world tells them not to. If you want to keep walking through gardens like this one, if you want more stories where hidden hearts are finally seen, then subscribe so you do not miss another step of the journey. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what is the one word that best describes Clara's quiet strength to you? Mrs. Aldridge, the housekeeper, eventually thawed completely. One winter evening, she approached Clara with a small leather-bound book. "These are my mother's recipes," she said, her voice gruff with emotion. "I thought you might like to have them. Since you are the one who will be keeping this house in the years to come." Clara took the book and she saw the old woman's eyes glistening. "Thank you," she said. "I will take care of it." And she did. Years passed. The garden grew. The Duke and Duchess had a daughter whom they named Rose, after the first bloom that had opened in that sacred place. She had her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness, and she was loved more than she could ever understand. Clara grew old, but she never grew invisible again. She was seen every day by the man who had loved her from the moment she saved him, and she saw him truly in return. One evening in the autumn of their lives, they sat together in the garden, watching the sun set over the hills that had once seemed so distant. "Do you remember," Clara said, "when I was invisible?" The Duke took her hand. "You were never invisible, my love. You were simply waiting for someone worthy of seeing you." She smiled, and the years fell away. "I found him," she said. He pressed her hand to his lips. "And I found her." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The roses swayed in the evening breeze, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked, just as it had on the day a stranger collapsed in the mud and a woman knelt to save him. The story does not end there, because stories of love do not end. They ripple outward, touching everyone who hears them, planting seeds of hope in the hearts of those who have forgotten that they too deserve to be seen. And if you have ever felt invisible, if you have ever wondered if anyone will ever truly see you, know this: the right eyes are out there, the right heart is searching for you, and when you find each other, the world will shift. Because that is what love does. It sees the invisible. It calls the forgotten. It brings the hidden to light. And it never ever gives up. There is a quiet power in the kind of love that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with fanfare or fireworks. It seeps into the cracks of a life, filling them with warmth, until one day you look around and realize that the cold is gone, that the loneliness has been replaced by something steady and true. Clara felt that power every morning when she woke in the great bed at Ashworth Hall, every evening when she walked through the garden she had restored, every time she caught the Duke's gaze across a crowded room and saw still the same wonder that had been there on the day he knelt before her in the mud. But there was one thing she had not yet done, one piece of her past that remained unclosed. Margaret had been rescued, yes. The two sisters had reunited, wept together, laughed together, begun the slow work of rebuilding a bond that had been broken by time and distance. But there was another sibling, another person who had been lost to Clara in the years after her parents' death. Her brother. Thomas Holloway had been the eldest of the three children, the one who had been sent away to school when Clara was still a child. He had written letters at first, full of youthful enthusiasm and plans for the future. Then the letters had grown shorter, rarer, and after their parents died, Thomas had vanished entirely. No one knew where he had gone. The last anyone had heard, he had joined the army, shipped out to some distant colony, and never returned. Clara had assumed he was dead. It was easier than hoping. But now, in the quiet aftermath of the battle with Philip, a letter arrived. It was postmarked from London, and the handwriting was unfamiliar. She opened it with trembling hands, bracing herself for more bad news. It was from Thomas. He was alive. He had been injured in the war, lost a leg, spent years in a military hospital recovering. He had been too ashamed to write, too proud to beg for help. But he had heard through the grapevine of old soldiers and travellers that his sister had married a duke, and he was writing now not to ask for money or position, but simply to know if she would see him. Clara read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she went to the Duke, showed him the letter, and said, "I must go to him." The Duke did not hesitate. "We will both go." They travelled to London, to a modest boarding house in a quiet street near the river. Thomas was waiting in a small parlour, leaning on a wooden crutch. He looked older than his years, his face lined with pain and exhaustion. But when he saw Clara, his eyes lit up with the same light she remembered from their childhood. "You came," he said, his voice cracking. She crossed the room and embraced him, holding him as though she could make up for all the lost years with the strength of her arms alone. "I never stopped looking for you," she whispered. "I never stopped hoping." Thomas wept. He told her everything, the battles, the injury, the long years of recovery, the shame that had kept him away. He had been working as a clerk in a shipping office, living in near poverty, too proud to reach out. Clara listened. She did not judge. She simply held his hand and let him speak. And then she said something that surprised even herself. "Come home with us." Thomas stared at her. "Clara, I cannot. I am a cripple. I have nothing to offer." "You are my brother," she said. "That is enough." The Duke, standing in the doorway, added quietly, "Ashworth Hall has room, and you would be doing us a kindness. My wife has been lonely for the family she lost. You would be giving her back a piece of herself." Thomas looked at them both, his face a battlefield of emotion, and then he nodded. He came home with them. The estate gave him purpose. He was not a man who could sit idle. With Clara's encouragement, he began to help manage the estate's accounts, a skill he had developed during his years as a clerk. He was good at it, meticulous, patient, honest. The Duke trusted him implicitly. And slowly, as the seasons turned, Thomas began to heal. Not just his leg, which would never fully recover, but his heart. He began to smile again. He began to laugh. He began to believe that he was not a burden, but a gift. One evening, Clara found him in the library, reading by the fire. He looked up as she entered, and there was a peace in his face that she had not seen since they were children. "I never thought I would have this," he said, gesturing vaguely at the room, at the house, at the life he had been given. Clara sat down across from him. "Neither did I." He looked at her for a long moment. "You saved me, Clara. Not just from poverty. From myself." She shook her head. "You saved yourself. I only opened the door." But she knew in her heart that this was what her life had been leading toward. The years of invisibility had taught her to see others. The years of hardship had taught her to be strong. The years of love had taught her to give. And now she was pouring that love into the people around her and watching them bloom. Her uncle came next. It was not a happy reunion. The old doctor had never written to her after her marriage. He had considered her departure a betrayal, a theft of the labor he had relied on for so many years. But when word reached Thornwick that the Duke's brother had been imprisoned, and that Clara had played a role in his capture, something shifted in the old man's heart. He wrote a letter. It was short, awkward, clearly difficult for him. "I was wrong about you. I am sorry." Clara read it and felt a strange mix of emotions. Gratitude for the apology she had never expected, sorrow for the years of coldness that could never be reclaimed, and a quiet, steady peace because she did not need his approval anymore. She had found her own worth. She wrote back. She forgave him. Not because he deserved it, but because she did not want to carry the weight of bitterness any longer. But she did not invite him to Ashworth Hall. Some bridges are too damaged to cross, and Clara had learned that forgiveness does not always mean reconciliation. The years continued their gentle march. Clara and the Duke grew older together, their love deepening with each passing season. They had 2 more children, a son, Edward, who inherited his father's grey eyes and his mother's quiet determination, and another daughter, Eleanor, whose laughter filled the halls of Ashworth Hall like sunlight. The garden became a sanctuary, not just for Clara, but for the entire family. The roses that had once been a monument to grief now bloomed in a riot of colour, tended by Clara's own hands, and later by the children she taught. She showed them how to prune, how to water, how to wait. She taught them that beauty grows in silence, that patience is a form of love, that the most important things are not seen but felt. And the Duke watched her, this woman who had saved him in every way a person could be saved, and he marvelled at the life they had built. One evening, as they sat on the terrace overlooking the garden, he took her hand and said, "Do you ever regret it?" She looked at him, puzzled. "Regret what?" "Marrying me. Leaving the quiet life you knew, facing all of this." She turned to him, her eyes steady and warm. "I regret nothing. I would walk through the mud again. I would face every trial again. I would do it all 1,000 times over for the life we have built together." He raised her hand to his lips. "I do not deserve you." She smiled. "You are wrong. You deserve everything, and I intend to give it to you for the rest of our days." The sun set as it had set 1,000 times before. The roses swayed. The children's laughter drifted from somewhere inside the house, and Clara Holloway, the invisible woman who had been seen at last, closed her eyes and felt for the first time in her life completely and utterly whole. This is the kind of story that does not need sequels. It is complete in itself, a circle closed, a journey finished. But the truth is that every ending is also a beginning. Every love story once told plants seeds in the hearts of those who hear it. And if you have ever wondered whether your own story will have a happy ending, whether you will ever be truly seen, truly loved, truly held, know that the answer is not found in waiting. It is found in the choices you make today, the kindness you offer to a stranger, the courage to kneel in the mud when no one else will, the patience to wait for the roses to bloom. Because the person who will see you, the person who will love you, the person who will cross half of England to find you, they are out there, and they are searching just as you are. And when you find each other, the world will shift. It will all have been worth it.